Ruff, ruff, ruff. Welcome to Mia the Math Mutt and how to find a percent. Finding percents are actually very easy, so let me show you how. So, first of all, always remember, let's start with 10%. 10%, we know percent means out of 100, is 10 over 100 or 1/10. So 10% of any number is just 1/10 of that number. So let's start with our first example here, 350. What is 10% of 350? Well, it is a tenth of it. And we remember that our place value system is all in tenths. So really we have units, which are the kind of ones, and you multiply by 10, you have tens. You multiply by 10, you have hundreds. You multiply 10, you have thousands. So each place value is 10 times bigger going to the left or 10 times smaller going to the right. So 1/10 of 350 is 35. And when we write that, it becomes 1/10 of 350 is, 35. What is 10% of 200? Well, again, it's one decimal place over, 20. So I'll just write that here, 20. So notice how you're kind of moving down the decimal line. The decimal's going to the left one position. What is 10% of 75? Well, here's the decimal point. It's going to go here, 7.5. What is 10% of 6.4? 0.64. So it's very easy to find 10% of any number. It's just one decimal place over. So let's say we had the question, what is 20% of 30? Well, I know what 10% is. I know that 10% is a tenth of 30. So that's like going like this, is 3. 10% of 30 is 3. So what is 20%? Well, 20 is double 10. So I just double this. So I'm going to multiply, if I multiply this by 2, I get 20%. Sorry for my terrible writing. And so that 20% of 30 is 6. What if they asked, what is 40% of 30? Again, I go back to my 10%, because that's always easy to find. 10% is 3, so 40% is 10 times 4, so 3 times 4 is 12. So 40% is 12. Percent is really important when you buy things because often there is tax, and the tax is often 15%. So let's say I bought a t-shirt for $20 and I have to pay 15% tax. How do I figure that out? Well, I always start with 10%. So 10% of 20 is 2, but they want 15%. Well, I already have the 10 out of it. I know that's $2. Now I have to find the 5%, which is half of the 10. So if 10% is 2, then the other 5% will be 1. So 15% of 20 will be $3 tax. But there is another way that we can solve this question. So we can always use our 10% rule and then figure out the difference. Or we can write it like an algebra sentence and figure it out. So 15%, how do I write that in numbers? Well, that's the same as saying 0.15, 15%. We know that of in math means times 20. So to do what is 15% of 20, I just multiply 0.15 times 20. So I just multiply it out, and I get 300. Well, does that make sense? 15% of 20 is $300? Of course not. I have to always remember there's a decimal. And so I see how many digits are past the decimal point in this whole question. Well, the 1 is past the decimal and the 5 is past the decimal. 2 places, which means there's going to be 2 numbers past the decimal in my answer, so the answer is 3. So that's another way of doing it. You turn it into an algebra sentence and just multiply it. Don't forget your decimal, and that will work for anything. So you may use either of these two methods to find the percent.